Hello, Zion Acts class. My name's Connor. If you don't know me, I'm a fourth year seminarian at Concordia Seminary. I'll be preaching this coming Sunday, October 4th. So, Pastor Roland has asked me to fill in for Acts class today. So, we're going to go through the lectionary for Proper 22. A lot of great texts in here. And so, I heard Roland say that if you find some things interesting, well, then it's your turn next week and you get to say some things. So, I may do things a little bit differently. I may highlight some different things. I'm going to kind of do my first run through of all three of the texts with you, and we'll just kind of jump through and see where we go. All right. So, Proper 22, we've got Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 to 7. The psalm of the day is Psalm 80, 7 to 19. And then the epistle is Philippians 3, verses 4b to 14. And then Matthew 21, 33 to 46. Now, Philippians 3 is kind of the odd one in that we're reading through Philippians kind of chronologically in order over the last few weeks and then continuing on through. So, Philippians 3 does not match. Now, a lot of times when the lectionary is happening, there will be anywhere from 2 to 4 of the readings that are matched. A lot of times you get Old Testament and Gospel, or sometimes a Psalm is thrown in there. Sometimes they do a two-part matchup on either one. But for our purposes today, Philippians 3 does not match with these. We'll still read it just to kind of be formed by it, but it does not kind of go into the normal things for the day. So let's jump into Isaiah chapter 5, a great text here. Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it, cleared it of stones, and he planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it, and he hewed out a wine vat in it. And he looked for it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there for me to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? But now I will tell you what I will do with my vineyard. I'll remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I'll break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and briars and thorns shall grow up. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice, but behold bloodshed, and righteousness, but behold an outcry. Psalm 80 is, Restore us, O God of hosts. Let your face shine that we may be saved. You brought a vine out of Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it. It took deep root and filled the land. The mountains were covered with its shade, the mighty cedars with its branches. It sent out its branches to the sea and its shoots to the river. Why then have you broken down its wall so that all who pass along the way pluck its fruit? The boar from the forest ravages it, and all that move in the field feed on it. Turn again, O God of hosts. Look down from heaven and see. Have regard for this vine, the stock that your right hand planted, and for the son whom you made strong for yourself. They have burned it with fire. They have cut it down. May they perish at the rebuke of your face. But let your hand be on the man of your right hand, the Son of Man whom you have made strong for yourself. Then we shall not turn back from you. Give us life, and we will call upon your name. Restore us, O Lord God of hosts. Let your face shine that we may be saved. I'm actually going to skip the epistle. I know I said in the intro that I wouldn't. I'm going to skip it. We'll hear it on Sunday. But for the purposes of this sermon and this preparation and kind of this process, I'm going to ignore it, all right? So we jump to the gospel in Matthew chapter 21. Hear another parable. There was a master of a house who planted a vineyard and put a fence around it and dug a winepress in it and built a tower and leased it to tenants and went into another country. When the season for fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit. And the tenants took his servants and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. Again he sent other servants more than the first, and they did the same to him. Finally he sent his son to them, saying, They'll respect my son. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, This is the heir. Come, Let us kill him and have his inheritance. And they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. When, therefore, the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to these tenants? They said to him, he's going to put those wretches into a miserable death and let out the vineyard to other tenants, who will give him the fruits in their seasons. Jesus said to them, have you never read in the scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. And the one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and what falls on anyone, it will crush him. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them. And although they were seeking to arrest him, they feared the crowds, because they held him to be a prophet. So those ends kind of our three readings of consideration, and I have to be honest, I've looked at them before doing this, because I can't just shoot from the hip in something like this. So I've at least glanced at the readings to kind of give an idea of what we're going to do. So let's jump to Isaiah chapter 5. Now, in the entire book of Isaiah, he uses a ton of plant imagery. Okay, Isaiah is kind of king on the plant imagery. He loves talking about agriculture, and so the vine, the vineyard, the plant, the root, the shoot of Jesse, the branch in its stem, things laying to waste and then coming into root, all over Isaiah and his prophecy. So if we're going to consider this song, this vineyard song, right? So let me sing. Already we've got Isaiah the prophet speaking for the Lord, right? Let me sing for my beloved. So the person who's singing this song has a deep connection for the other, right? My love song concerning his vineyard. So the one singing, their loved one has a vineyard, okay? So who is my beloved? Who's the speaker? And where is the vineyard and what is it, okay? And so here's the song. We can literally put quotes right there. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. There existed to somebody very close to me, to my beloved, the one that I love, on a very fertile hill. The idiom that's used is one that's on a really, really fat hill that would produce a lot. And so here's what he did. And if you look, there's a ton of actions going on. He dug it, he cleared it, and he planted it, not just with normal vines, but with choice vines. Okay? So this is painting a picture not of a vineyard owner who just bought the best and let it sort of do what it was going to do. No, this vineyard owner is deeply connected with what he's doing. And he even builds a watchtower in the midst of it. So this isn't just a temporary thing. He's not coming in, buying the best, using it up, and then dumping it away. He's building a watchtower. He wants to be involved in this vineyard. He hews out a wine vat in it. So it could be that it's a wine vat for the actual pressing of the grapes, or it could be that it's the wine vat to hold the grapes, to hold the wine. So a permanent storage is kind of a picture that we get here. And he looked for it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. So you see, he did everything right. In fact, he did everything, we would say, to the nth degree. He sort of went all out in this vineyard. And he looked for it to yield grapes. He thought it would yield grapes. And any reasonable person hearing this story would also think that. And it yielded wild grapes. Now, wild grapes doesn't really capture how disappointing the yield is. The word that it comes from is stinking, gross, offensive almost, a smell that causes offense. These are really bad grapes, not just wild ones that are growing kind of haphazardly. These are offensive. The fact that the vineyard owner went through so much trouble, and yet this is what comes about it, is offensive. And so the song breaks. Right here we can see a break from the song. So the wall has been broken, the song has been sung, and now it's time to speak to somebody. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem. So we know who the song is being addressed to, or it's sung around. O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah. Those are two different ways of saying the same thing. You know, children of Israel, inhabitants of Jerusalem, men of Judah, people of God. Okay? Judge between me and my vineyard. I want you to look at it and tell me if I'm missing something. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I haven't done in it? And it's a rhetorical question. The answer is, well, nothing. You did everything right. Almost like, yeah, you did everything right. When I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? Now, this question also isn't looking for an answer. You've got two rhetorical questions. What more could I have done? Nothing. Why did it yield wild grapes? And we're supposed to say, I don't know. I have no idea why it failed. Why a vineyard that had this much care, that you loved, that you clearly loved in action and demonstration, why it didn't work. So after setting the tension and leaving it right here, where we've got two rhetorical questions, you did everything right, and I don't know. Okay, here's what I'm going to do now. I'll tell you what I'll do to my vineyard. I'm going to remove its hedge, and it's going to be devoured. You know that thing that I set up to protect it? I'm going to remove it and just let it come. So the hedge is going. I'm going to break down its wall, and it's going to be trampled down. The images of wild animals coming through and trampling down all of the grapes that have been growing. I'll make it a waste, completely destroyed. That care that I had from the beginning will be no longer. I'm not going to prune it. I'm not going to hoe the ground. And briars and thorns, I think an easier way for us to get that is thorns and thistles. They're going to grow up. Bad things are going to happen. Hands are going to get plucked in the touching of anything that this vineyard is going to grow. And I'm also going to command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. None. So it's going to dry up. This fertile, beautiful vineyard that was overflowing to the point where he had to cut into stone to have places to store it or extra places to smash the grapes is now going to be a dry. It's going to be wilderness. And here's where finally, if you know the story of the vineyard, you knew this was where it was going. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts, of Yahweh of armies, another way to say that. So we see the power of the one we're speaking of here. The vineyard of Yahweh of armies is the house of Israel and the men of Judah. So before, up earlier in the text, you recall, we've got inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah. The ones he's calling to judge for the vineyard is the vineyard. They are the vineyard. House of Israel, inhabitants of Jerusalem, men of Judah. They're his pleasant planting. They are his vineyard. Okay? And he looked for justice, and behold, bloodshed. For righteousness, and behold, an outcry. And now the phrasing here and the way that this actually shows up in Hebrew, and I don't know Hebrew all that well, but I had to learn this text in Hebrew for a class. So I'm just telling what some other smart guy told me, that justice and bloodshed sound the same. That righteousness and outcry sound the same. It's a play on words that Isaiah is doing here, where it's like, I looked for justice and I found just nothing right. And I looked for righteousness and there was no one standing in the right. It's a play on words where it seems similar, but it's so far off. And so we could say, this is the word of the Lord. Okay, So how is the destruction of the vineyard? How is the Lord looking for justice, and yet we provide him with bloodshed? For righteousness, and we give him an outcry. How is this the word of the Lord? How is this good news? And honestly, there's two places we can land in this text that are wonderful and great and so, so good. And it's at the end. We've got pleasant planting. All of that care that happened at the beginning, it doesn't get undone. We actually bring him delight. We are the planting of God's delight. We've been planted in his vineyard, each individually, collectively together. We're his pleasant planting. And that care that he demonstrates at the beginning, that's for us. Through Jesus, through all of the ways that we want to make that connection, we are his vineyard, his beloved, his pleasant planting. But just because of that good news, it doesn't release us from the calls that this text brings us to, where clearly we see our failure at bringing justice, and yet we bring bloodshed. And for righteousness, and we bring out an outcry. And that outcry can be from the ones who have not experienced the righteousness, who have not experienced the justice. And that outcry can be from creation itself. From Romans, we've got creation groaning and yearning for something bigger, and yet in the time, we see brokenness all around. And so Psalm 80 gives us a context, a way of understanding, of seeing a response, and a story where this imagery can actually come from, okay? So Isaiah is always playing, and most of the prophets are always playing off of Israel's history. And for the most part, they're going to use Moses and the Exodus as big examples of God's favor, his deliverance, his providence, but then also his rebuke and his condemnation and his chastising of the people. So we see here Psalm 80, we've got a prayer, and we're jumping in at verse 7, so we're missing 1 through 6. Restore us, O God of hosts. So what do we need restoring from? Well, we are the bad vineyard. We are the bad vineyard. We've been making stinking, offensive, gross grapes out of our lives. Let your face shine so that we may be saved. And I'm seeing here, I think of a lot of imagery when I'm reading the Bible, and we've got kind of a sun, right? Not S-O-N, but an actual sun shining on, and it's the Lord shining with his favor, lifting his countenance upon us that we may be saved. And it's by his looking and considering us that we receive that grace and that favor from the Lord. And we remember through the history of not only our own and our personal experiences or the recent church history, but we remember back with our fathers in Israel. Okay, you brought a vine out of Egypt. You brought something that was going to grow out, this root of Jesse, this stem, this shoot, this branch that's going to come out of Egypt. You drove out nations. So the Lord Yahweh was active. This Yahweh of armies that we had, he's been active this whole time in Exodus, pushing out the nations from the promised land and then actually planting the seed in Israel, in the promised land. You cleared the ground. So we've got this beautiful hands-on experience that the Lord is doing. You cleared the ground, you took a deep root, and you filled the land. The mountains, they were covered with its shade. The mighty cedars and its branches. It sent out its branches to the seed. So we've got a ton of hyperbole in this text, a ton of exaggerated language where the promised land is bigger than it was. It really isn't that big of a spotch of land, but in this text we see that the promised land is bigger. It's almost like it's opening up to be something much larger and much more important than even it was in this historical moment. And we see a vision of the last day, of the fulfillment of all things, when the promised land in that little spot becomes the entire new heavens and the new earth. Branches to the sea and its shoots to the river, of course, talking about the Nile. Anytime we see capital R, river, we're talking about the Nile. So we're back to Egypt again. Why then have you broken down its walls? Okay, all of a sudden we had beautiful fulfillment and we're back to here. Why did you do this, Lord? Why did you break down its walls? Why did you, so that all the people who could pass along would pluck its fruit, who would take its fruit away to pull it from the vineyard? The boar from the forest ravages it, and all that move in the field, they feed on it. So we see a brokenness to the vineyard. We see that it's been let in by some outside forces, and so we beg, as the vineyard, as God's people, as inhabitants of Jerusalem, of the heavenly Jerusalem, of Zion, of the church now, we say, turn again, O God of hosts. Look down from heaven and see. Behold, look upon us with your face, with your countenance, and have regard for this vine. See how the psalmist is living in the metaphor. They're living in that imaginary world that's not all that imaginary. They're living in the images as they come through their head. The stock that your right hand planted in the ground. And for the son whom you made strong for yourself. And I just want to pause right there because that, beautiful, beautiful Christological imagery. The stock that your right hand, the hand of power is the right hand, and the Lord holding up his son that you made strong for yourself. But let's not forget, we've got a historical fulfillment of son, of sonship, of that identity of son, right? You've got Psalm 2 for kiss the Son, lest he be angry. And you've also got, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand, and I'll make your enemies at your footstool. We've got all the way back, I think it's Exodus chapter 4. God calls Israel his firstborn son. And that's where we get texts that get fulfilled in Matthew out of Egypt. I called my son. That prophecy would be fulfilled. And Jesus takes on the identity of all of Israel. All of Israel gets funneled down to Jesus. He becomes the faithful vineyard, the faithful steward, the faithful one who the Lord makes strong for himself. And now when you see all of Israel's history pulled down into Jesus, we see they've burned it with fire. They've burned Jesus and they've burned all of Israel. They've cut it all down in this person of Jesus. May they perish at the rebuke of your face. Only after seeing the fulfillment of all things with Jesus and with Israel's history can we beg the Lord in prayer for a rebuke of his enemies. But let your hand be on the man of your right hand. Let your hand be with your firstborn son, Israel. Let your hand be with all who are inhabitants of Jerusalem. Let your right hand be with your chosen Messiah, the Son of Man, whom you have made strong for yourself. Now, Son of Man, we also get imagery from Daniel. So we're not just pulling straight to Son of Man as Jesus talks about himself in the Gospels. We've got bigger things that Jesus is filling in as he's moving and doing his ministry. Then we shall not turn back from you. There's going to be this protection that happens where we won't even be able to ruin the vineyard because of what the Lord is doing. Give us life and we'll call upon your name. We're not going to be wild, stinking grapes anymore. Restore us, O Lord God of hosts, O Yahweh, the God of armies. Right there, right? Anytime you see of hosts, think army, think battle, right? Restore us, O God of armies, and let your face shine that we may be saved. So we see that repetition of that line there, that the Lord's face shining like the sun. In this vineyard imagery we see that we may be saved, and that the safety and the saving and the salvation of the people happens because of the shining of God's face, right? Okay, so we're skipping the epistle. I'm going to jump right into Gospel of Matthew. I realize I only got about 5 minutes. I could talk about all this for a very long time. But the people who Jesus is speaking to, and I think this is important because I miss this all the time when I'm reading the Bible, and I think about that the characters, and I say characters as just the people that we encounter in the scriptures. They're real people. But the characters that we see as people in the individual stories, I forget that they have things that they know, things that they expect, and things that they would experience. I sometimes take my own thoughts and my own experience and I put it on them. And so something that's surprising to me in the scriptures might not be surprising to them. So Jesus tells a parable, and these people that he's telling it to, they know about the vineyard. See, in Isaiah chapter 27, we get a reversal of the vineyard. So Psalm 80 speaks out of the brokenness of the vineyard and begs for a restoring, and we see a restoring in the person of the Son of Israel, of the Son of Man, all filled up in Jesus as we look back from the cross. But these people saw the fulfillment in Isaiah 27. They saw the calling in of the people into this eternal city of Zion and the restoration of the vineyard as it was broken. But Jesus is going to subvert them. He's going to take something they know deeply and very familiar, and he's going to flip it over. So there's a master of the house who planted a vineyard, and he put a fence around it, and he dug it, and he built a tower, and he leased it to tenants. Okay? So it's basically like Jesus said, okay, so you know this story. Let me tell you about the story. Or I'm going to do some teaching that's related to it. And so when the season for fruit, okay, when we're looking for grapes, when you see fruit there, we're thinking grapes. He sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit. Okay, so who's actually in the vineyard now? Now we got tenants there. Tenants taking care of it. It's not the vineyard owner who's deeply involved. Now we've got people taking care of it. And there's a way we can get here. We can think about our stewardship of creation, and this story being a stewardship story, a stewardship parable, a stewardship teaching. That's one week we can go. I don't want to go that way today, but there's a million things you can pull out of every single text. But the tenants took the servants, and they beat one, they killed another, and they stoned another. Basically, nothing goes well for any of the ones that get sent. He sent others, more than the first, and they did the same thing. Finally, he sent his son to them, and he says, they're going to respect my son. Okay. Now the vineyard owner is getting closer in connection to his vineyard. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, oh, this is the heir. Let's kill him and take his inheritance. And they took him and they threw him out of the vineyard and they killed him. So who's doing the action here? Who is actually attacking whom? The tenants are attacking the heir of the vineyard. Think of the heir as an actual representative of the vineyard, of the beloved, right? So Jesus asked them, what's he going to do about it? So they know the story. Jesus has set the scene, and he's told some actions, and he said, what's he going to do? And they said, he's going to put those wretches into miserable death and let out the vineyard to other tenants who are given the fruit in their seasons. Which would be the natural reaction to anybody who's familiar with that. Of course, protect the vineyard, protect the heir. They're important. We're awaiting restoration. We want to see that. And then Jesus takes the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And all of a sudden, they see the switch that happened in the text happen to them. They've been reading themselves into Isaiah chapter 5 as people living in Isaiah 27 and the fulfillment and the restoration, and yet they're still having outcry and bloodshed and not righteousness and justice. And Jesus says that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you. You who are his pleasant planting, it'll be taken away from you and given to a people producing fruits. And the one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces. And when it falls on anyone, it will crush him. And they figured it out. So Jesus took his own parable and he told it in such a way as to have the same effect on them. That Isaiah chapter 5 verse 7, that crazy flip that's happened, Jesus is intending to do the same thing to the Pharisees. And he does it with a different story. Okay, so there's the texts as we see them, and there's a basic run through of my first thoughts kind of going in. So I've got Isaiah chapter 5. We've got the vineyard song and the vineyard surprise. And Isaiah or Psalm 80 gives us the context and then as well as a prayer out of that. Isaiah 27 shows us the fulfillment and the restoration of the vineyard. In Matthew 21, we see how Jesus subverts some Pharisees who think they know everything. They can't help but see the end, and we can't either. We can't help but see Jesus in the end, and we miss some of the flip that can happen because of the story. We miss the play between righteousness and bloodshed and justice and outcry. We miss how we could be improving or could be radically changed by the Spirit to not have stinking, offensive grapes. So, what's the gospel in this text? And I'm specifically probably going to preach on Isaiah chapter 5. That'll be the primary way that I go on Sunday. Is that God looks on his vineyard with love. He promised to redeem it to newness. Now, that's not explicit in the text, it's something I'm pulling out with the broader story. And that God firmly planted it. He just didn't pretend plant it or kind of do it. He firmly planted his people. So I'm going to go somewhere in the neighborhood of that God has planted his people in Jesus, his steadfast love. But we're also under the care of Yahweh. Even when we're failing, even when he rebukes us, he's still caring for us. And so I think I'm going to try to tell a story or two that has the same effect of frustration, burden, and sadness over something that doesn't work out, and yet the one who grows, who does, who's acting in that situation still loves even the thing after it's broken, or maybe even after they've broken it. They can see new life in it. I don't know how to do that. I'm not that creative. I'm going to have to figure it out. So just some great text, some great Isaiah. I love Isaiah. He's so full of mystery and beauty, and it's just great. So thank you very much. This has been really, really fun. I hope it's been encouraging and enlightening, and that the Lord would continue to grow you and all of us together in through his word. In his name, amen.